Aaron and Gwen arrived at the resort just as the sun was setting over the vast Pacific Ocean. The golden hues danced on the surface of the water, creating a mesmerizing welcome for the newlyweds. As the couple stepped out of the shuttle, they were greeted by warm smiles from the resort staff and the soothing sounds of traditional Hawaiian music. Flower leis were draped around their necks, filling the air with the delicate fragrance of plumeria. Gwen couldn't help but giggle as Aaron leaned in, nuzzling his lei, before declaring it the best smell in the world. Their room was nothing short of spectacular. A sprawling suite with floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto a private balcony that overlooked the ocean. Inside, the decor blended modern luxury with island charm, featuring polished wooden floors, soft cream linens, and vibrant pops of color in the form of tropical flowers and cushions. Aaron flopped onto the enormous bed, arms wide open, while Gwen ran her fingers over the soft petals of the orchid arrangement on the bedside table. A bottle of champagne chilled in a silver bucket, accompanied by a note from the resort staff congratulating them on their marriage. They wasted no time diving into the experience. That first evening, they dressed up for dinner, Gwen slipping into a flowing sundress that moved like water with every step, and Aaron donning a crisp linen shirt. They strolled hand in hand along the resort's winding paths, lit softly by tiki torches, until they reached the beachfront restaurant. Their table was right on the sand, just a few feet from the lapping waves. A live ukulele performance accompanied the gentle hum of the sea as they dined on fresh seafood, Aaron savoring a grilled mahi-mahi, while Gwen couldn't stop raving about the coconut shrimp. Their laughter echoed under the starlit sky. Aaron, always the joker, recounted a story about their wedding day when he almost tripped walking down the aisle. Gwen teased him about his dance moves during the reception, mimicking his awkward attempts at twirling her. As the meal came to an end, they clinked glasses, savoring the sweetness of the dessert and the moment. The next morning, they woke early to catch the sunrise. Wrapped in a blanket on the balcony, they sipped steaming cups of Kona coffee, watching as the sky transformed from dusky pinks to fiery oranges. It was a moment of quiet intimacy, with no words needed as they leaned into each other, the world still and perfect. After breakfast, they set out to explore the resort. Gwen had insisted they try everything the island had to offer, and Aaron, though initially reluctant about being too busy, soon found himself swept up in her enthusiasm. They began with a snorkeling trip to a nearby reef. Gwen squealed with delight as she spotted a sea turtle gliding gracefully through the water. Aaron, ever the adventurous one, pointed out a school of brightly colored parrotfish darting among the coral. When they returned to shore, their faces were flushed with excitement, their hands still tightly clasped as they shared stories of what they had seen. In the afternoon, they indulged in a couple's spa treatment. Gwen picked a lamalomi massage, which the therapist explained was a traditional Hawaiian technique meant to nurture both body and soul. The room was filled with the soothing scent of lavender and sandalwood as the therapists worked their magic, leaving Aaron and Gwen feeling utterly relaxed. Afterward, they lazed by the infinity pool, sipping on refreshing mai tais and sharing a plate of fresh pineapple and mango slices. Aaron teased Gwen about how quickly she turned pink in the sun, while she retaliated by smearing sunscreen on his nose, laughing at the white blob that made him look like a surfer caricature. On their third day, they ventured off the resort for a hiking excursion to a nearby waterfall. The trail wound through dense rainforest, alive with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves. Gwen, ever the planner, had packed a small picnic, which they enjoyed on a rocky outcrop overlooking the cascade. Aaron insisted on taking a dip in the crystal-clear pool beneath the falls, coaxing Gwen to join him. She shrieked at the initial chill of the water but soon found herself laughing uncontrollably as Aaron splashed her. They stayed until their skin was pruned and their hearts full. Evenings were always special. One night, they attended a traditional luau hosted by the resort. Gwen's eyes sparkled as they watched the hula dancers sway gracefully to the rhythm of the drums. Aaron couldn't resist volunteering when the host called for audience participation, joining the men's hula competition with exaggerated movements that had Gwen doubled over with laughter. When the fire dancers took the stage, Aaron held Gwen's hand tightly, their faces illuminated by the flames as they watched in awe. One of the most memorable nights came when Aaron surprised Gwen with a private sunset cruise. As the boat cut through calm waters, they stood at the bow, the wind tousling their hair. A bottle of champagne was opened, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Aaron turned to Gwen and whispered, "This feels like a dream." She smiled, her eyes glistening, and replied, "It's our dream." Throughout their stay, they embraced every moment with a sense of wonder. They tried paddleboarding for the first time, laughing as they fell more than they stood. They learned to make leis in a workshop, with Aaron jokingly fashioning a lopsided crown for Gwen. They even took a helicopter ride over the island, marveling at the lush green valleys and towering volcanic peaks below. Each experience brought them closer, their laughter and love filling every space they occupied. On their last day, they decided to keep things simple, spending the morning lounging in a cabana by the beach. Gwen read a novel she had brought along, while Aaron dozed off, the sound of the waves providing a natural lullaby. They took one final swim in the ocean, letting the saltwater wash away their worries and fill them with a sense of renewal. As the sun set on their final evening, they sat on their balcony, sipping the last of their champagne and watching the horizon. "I don't want this to end," Gwen said softly. Aaron wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "It doesn't have to," he replied. "This is just the beginning." And as the stars emerged one by one, they sat together in silence, knowing that the memories they had created in this slice of paradise would stay with them forever. Aaron felt Gwen's excitement about visiting the resort's bar was uncharacteristic. She had never been one for late-night socializing, preferring quiet dinners and long walks on the beach. But tonight she seemed determined. "I've heard it's where all the action happens," she said with a brightness that felt forced. Aaron, reluctant but wanting to make her happy, agreed to accompany her. The bar was lively, its open-air design allowing the sounds of crashing waves to mix with laughter and the occasional clink of glasses. Strung-up fairy lights bathed the space in a soft glow, and a live band played a mellow tune in the corner. Gwen looked radiant in a crimson dress, drawing attention as they entered. Aaron felt a flicker of pride at her beauty but also an unfamiliar unease he couldn't quite shake. As they settled at a small table, Gwen scanned the room with an energy that puzzled Aaron. She waved at someone near the bar, a tall, broad-shouldered man with an easy confidence. He turned, and Aaron noticed his dark hair, chiseled jaw, and a magnetic presence that seemed to command attention. Gwen introduced him as Jacob, someone she had met earlier at the poolside while Aaron had been napping. Jacob joined them, carrying his drink. His voice was smooth, his laughter infectious, and he quickly became the center of the conversation. Aaron tried to engage, but Jacob's charisma was overpowering. Gwen, for her part, seemed utterly enchanted, leaning forward in her chair, her laughter spilling out freely at Jacob's every joke. Aaron felt like an outsider. He sipped his drink quietly, watching the easy camaraderie between his wife and this stranger. When Gwen placed her hand on Jacob's arm while laughing at something he said, Aaron's unease turned into a sharp pang of jealousy. "So, Jacob," Aaron said, trying to reassert himself in the conversation, "what brings you to Hawaii?" Jacob leaned back, effortlessly cool. "Business, mostly. But I always make time to enjoy life. You know how it is, work hard, play harder." His smile was disarming, but his tone carried a subtle arrogance that grated on Aaron. The evening stretched on. Gwen's attention remained glued to Jacob, her responses to Aaron becoming curt and distracted. At one point, when Aaron attempted to steer the conversation back to their shared plans for the week, Gwen waved him off. "Let's talk about it later, Aaron. Jacob was just telling me about this amazing hike he did yesterday." Humiliation pricked at Aaron's pride. He tried to brush it off as harmless flirtation, but the night's pattern repeated itself over the following days. Gwen began suggesting visits to the bar more frequently, and each time, Jacob was there, as if by some unspoken agreement. Aaron tagged along reluctantly, but his presence felt increasingly redundant. Gwen's behavior grew colder, subtle at first. She started walking ahead of him rather than beside him, her hand slipping away from his when he reached for it. Conversations became one-sided, her tone clipped when Aaron tried to express his feelings. Why are you being so sensitive? She snapped one evening when he voiced his discomfort. We're just making new friends. But it wasn't just friends. It was Jacob. The breaking point came during a dinner Aaron had planned as a way to rekindle their connection. He had arranged a private beachside table under the stars, complete with a violinist. Gwen had seemed indifferent when he told her about it. Can we do it tomorrow? She asked casually. Jacob mentioned there's a karaoke night at the bar tonight, and it sounds fun. Aaron's heart sank. Gwen, this is our honeymoon. I planned this for us. Can't we have one night to ourselves? Her eyes narrowed. Why do you always have to make everything about you, Aaron? Can't I enjoy myself without you sulking all the time? Her words cut deeper than he expected. She left for the bar anyway, leaving Aaron to dine alone under the flickering candlelight. When she returned to their room hours later, the scent of alcohol clinging to her, Aaron tried to confront her, his frustration spilling out. Do you even care that you left me alone tonight? Do you care about us at all anymore? Gwen rolled her eyes, a gesture so dismissive it sent a wave of anger crashing through Aaron. You're being ridiculous. Jacob's just fun to be around. Maybe you should try lightening up for once. Aaron couldn't believe what he was hearing. The woman who had once been his partner in everything now felt like a stranger, her affection replaced by indifference and her warmth by an icy detachment. The humiliation became public the next day. While lounging by the pool, Aaron overheard whispers from nearby guests. Isn't she the one who's always with that guy at the bar? One woman said to her friend. Yeah, her poor husband's sitting right there, the other replied, pity evident in her tone. Aaron's face burned with shame. He felt trapped, unable to defend himself without confirming their assumptions. Gwen, oblivious or indifferent, continued her spirited conversation with Jacob, who had sauntered over to their lounge chairs as if he belonged there. By the time their final evening arrived, Aaron felt utterly defeated. Gwen announced she was heading out one last time to say goodbye to Jacob. Aaron didn't argue. He couldn't muster the energy. Instead, he stayed on the balcony, staring at the ocean and wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. When Gwen returned hours later, she found Aaron sitting in the dark. He didn't look at her as she slipped into bed, the unspoken tension between them thicker than the humid night air. Aaron lay awake long after Gwen's breathing evened out, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with the storm of emotions inside him. The honeymoon he had envisioned, a time of love, connection, and shared dreams, had turned into a painful lesson in rejection and loneliness. The memories of their early days at the resort felt like a distant mirage. He wondered if they could ever recover from this, or if their honeymoon had been the beginning of the end. The shift in Gwen's demeanor had been subtle at first, but now it was impossible for Aaron to ignore. She seemed to come alive in Jacob's presence, her laughter louder, her smiles brighter. With Aaron, she was quieter, distracted, her words clipped when she spoke to him at all. Aaron tried to tell himself it was nothing, that he was imagining things, but the nagging doubt refused to let him rest. On their 7th day at the resort, Aaron decided he couldn't take it anymore. As Gwen announced that she was heading to the bar, just for a little while, he pretended to be engrossed in his book. I'll catch up later, he said, keeping his voice casual. Gwen barely looked at him as she grabbed her purse and left, her excitement palpable. Once she was gone, Aaron tossed the book aside and grabbed a lightweight jacket. He slipped out of the room, his steps quick but quiet as he made his way toward the bar. He felt a pang of guilt for following her, but it was drowned out by the gnawing need to understand what was happening. The bar was bustling, the sound of clinking glasses and lively chatter spilling out into the night. Aaron positioned himself near the entrance, careful to stay out of sight. It didn't take him long to spot Gwen. She was seated at the bar, her crimson dress striking under the dim lights, her posture relaxed and open. Jacob was beside her, leaning in close, his hand resting casually on the back of her chair. Aaron's chest tightened. He watched as Gwen threw her head back in laughter, a sound that once had been reserved for him. Jacob said something that made her laugh again, her hand lightly brushing against his arm. The sight of her touch sent a surge of jealousy and anger coursing through Aaron. For the next hour, Aaron stayed hidden, his eyes fixed on them. He noticed the way Gwen leaned toward Jacob, her body language inviting and engaged. She hadn't looked at Aaron like that in days. He saw the way Jacob's hand would occasionally drift to her shoulder or her lower back, the touch fleeting but deliberate. Gwen didn't pull away. When the bartender placed 2 cocktails in front of them, Gwen raised her glass in a toast, her eyes locked on Jacob's. Aaron strained to hear over the noise, catching just fragments of her words. "So glad we met," and "best part of this trip." Aaron's stomach churned. He felt like an outsider peering into a world where he no longer belonged. His wife, the woman he had vowed to spend his life with, seemed utterly enchanted by another man. The humiliation deepened when a couple seated nearby started whispering and glancing in Gwen and Jacob's direction. Aaron could almost hear their thoughts. "Poor guy, he doesn't even know." He stayed frozen in place, his mind a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and sadness. A part of him wanted to storm in, to confront them, to demand an explanation. But another part of him couldn't bear the thought of the scene it would cause, the judgmental stares, the pitying looks. Instead, he turned and left, his heart heavy and his pride in shreds. Back in their room, Aaron paced the floor, his mind replaying the scene over and over. Each detail felt like a knife twisting deeper into his chest. He wanted to confront Gwen, to ask her why she seemed so much happier with Jacob than with him. But when she returned hours later, humming softly to herself, he lost his nerve. "Did you have fun?" he asked, his voice strained. "It was fine," Gwen replied casually, kicking off her heels. She didn't elaborate, and Aaron didn't press her. The next day, Aaron decided to confront his suspicions head-on. He suggested they spend the day together, just the 2 of them. "We haven't had much time to ourselves lately," he said, trying to keep his tone light. Gwen hesitated before agreeing, and Aaron felt a glimmer of hope. He planned a day filled with activities he knew she loved, a morning hike, a leisurely lunch by the beach, and an afternoon at the spa. But throughout the day, Gwen's attention seemed elsewhere. She checked her phone frequently, her responses to Aaron's attempts at conversation perfunctory at best. By the time they returned to the room, Aaron's patience was wearing thin. "Is something wrong?" he asked as Gwen rummaged through her suitcase. She paused, her back to him. "What do you mean?" "You've been distant," Aaron said, his voice trembling slightly. "Ever since we got here, it's like I don't even exist to you anymore." Gwen turned to face him, her expression guarded. "You're being dramatic, Aaron." "Everything's fine." "It doesn't feel fine," he replied. "It feels like you'd rather be anywhere else than with me." Gwen sighed, her annoyance evident. "Maybe if you stopped being so clingy, I wouldn't feel that way." The words hit Aaron like a slap. Clingy? Was that how she saw him? He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Gwen brushed past him, muttering something about needing space, and left the room. Aaron sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, his mind racing. He replayed their conversation, searching for answers. Was he being too sensitive? Was he imagining things? Or had he already lost her to Jacob? That evening, Aaron couldn't stop himself from following her again. She was at the bar, just as he expected, and Jacob was there too. They were seated at a corner table this time, their heads bent close together in deep conversation. Gwen's face was animated, her eyes shining in a way Aaron hadn't seen in weeks. He stayed longer this time, watching as they shared drinks and stories. He noticed the way Gwen laughed freely with Jacob, her shoulders relaxed and her smile genuine. It was the way she used to laugh with Aaron. When they finally left the bar, walking side by side along the resort's moonlit paths, Aaron followed at a distance. He felt like a ghost, invisible and powerless, watching as his wife drifted further and further away. When they stopped by the beach, Aaron watched from the shadows as Gwen and Jacob sat on the sand, their voices too low for him to hear. The intimacy of the moment was undeniable, and Aaron felt his heart shatter. By the time Gwen returned to their room that night, Aaron was waiting for her, his emotions a volatile mix of anger and sadness. "Do you even care about me anymore?" he asked, his voice breaking. Gwen didn't meet his eyes. "I'm tired, Aaron. Can we talk about this tomorrow?" Aaron stared at her, his chest tight with unspoken words. "Sure," he said quietly, knowing tomorrow would bring no answers, only more distance. And as Gwen climbed into bed and turned her back to him, Aaron lay awake, wondering if their marriage had already slipped through his fingers. Aaron's worst fears solidified into a chilling certainty on the final night of their stay. Gwen had grown increasingly distant, her excuses to spend time alone piling up. Aaron had tried to bridge the gap between them, suggesting outings or quiet evenings together, but her replies were always the same. I'm tired, or maybe tomorrow. Tonight, though, something felt different. Gwen announced she was heading to the bar again, dressed in a fitted black dress that hugged her figure in ways that left Aaron momentarily stunned. Don't wait up, she added casually, grabbing her purse and slipping out the door before he could respond. Aaron sat frozen for a moment, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. The way she said it, dismissive, almost uncaring, ignited something in him. This wasn't paranoia anymore. He needed answers. Grabbing his phone, he decided to follow her, his steps careful and quiet as he navigated the dimly lit resort paths. The night was alive with the sounds of chirping insects and the distant crash of waves, but Aaron's focus was laser-sharp, his heart pounding in his chest. The bar was lively as always, but Aaron didn't need to scan the crowd for long. Gwen and Jacob were seated at a corner table, their heads close together. Gwen was laughing, her hand resting on Jacob's forearm as he spoke. Aaron clenched his jaw, a sharp pang of jealousy stabbing through him. He considered confronting them but hesitated. What would he say? What proof did he have? Then it happened. Jacob leaned in, whispering something into Gwen's ear that made her smile in a way Aaron hadn't seen in weeks. Her hand moved from his arm to his shoulder, lingering there before she closed the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that was neither brief nor subtle. Aaron's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't look away, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and humiliation. The woman he had vowed to spend his life with was kissing another man in plain view of anyone who cared to look. Instinctively, Aaron pulled out his phone, his hands trembling as he began recording. The screen displayed the damning scene, Gwen's fingers tangling in Jacob's hair, Jacob's hand resting possessively on her thigh. When they finally broke apart, Gwen glanced around, a flicker of caution crossing her face. She said something to Jacob, and together they stood, leaving the bar hand in hand. Aaron followed at a safe distance, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure they could hear it. He stayed far enough back to remain unseen, his phone still in hand, the camera ready. They walked along the moonlit path that led to the bungalows, their laughter carrying softly on the breeze. As they reached Jacob's bungalow, Gwen hesitated at the door. For a fleeting moment, Aaron thought she might turn back, but then Jacob leaned down, brushing a kiss against her cheek. She smiled, her hesitation melting away, and stepped inside. Aaron stopped dead in his tracks, his stomach churning. He raised his phone again, capturing the moment the door clicked shut behind them. The light inside the bungalow flickered on briefly before dimming to a softer glow. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, his mind racing. He wanted to burst in, to demand answers, to make them face the consequences of their betrayal. But another part of him, the part that had spent the past week feeling increasingly humiliated and invisible, stopped him. Instead, he stared at the phone in his hand. The video he had recorded was proof, undeniable evidence of Gwen's betrayal. His fingers hovered over the screen, tempted to play it back, but he couldn't bring himself to watch it. The walk back to the suite was a blur. Aaron's emotions swirled in a chaotic storm, anger at Gwen's betrayal, humiliation at being sidelined so easily, and a deep, aching sadness at the realization that their marriage was not what he had thought. Inside the suite, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the floor. The sounds of the resort continued outside, distant laughter, the rustle of palm trees, but inside, everything felt oppressively silent. Gwen returned hours later, her footsteps unsteady and her cheeks flushed. Aaron looked up as she entered, his face devoid of emotion. "You're still awake?" she asked, her tone casual, almost careless. Aaron didn't reply. He watched as she slipped off her shoes, her movements deliberate but slightly off balance. She didn't seem to notice the tension in the room or the way Aaron's eyes followed her every move. "I'm going to shower," she said, disappearing into the bathroom without waiting for a response. Aaron exhaled shakily, his grip tightening around his phone. He opened the video, his thumb hovering over the play button. This time he pressed it. The screen came to life with the damning evidence. Gwen laughing, leaning into Jacob's touch, their kiss, and the way she willingly followed him into his bungalow. Each second felt like a dagger to Aaron's heart. When Gwen emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, Aaron was still sitting there, the phone in his hand. She paused, noticing his tense posture. "Aaron, is something wrong?" He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and anger. "You tell me," he said, his voice low and steady. Gwen frowned, clearly caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" Aaron didn't answer. Instead, he turned the phone toward her and hit play. The color drained from Gwen's face as the video played, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to something that looked suspiciously like guilt. "Aaron, I can explain," she started, but he cut her off. "Don't," he said sharply. "Don't insult me by pretending there's an explanation for this." For the first time since their honeymoon began, Gwen looked genuinely unsettled. She opened her mouth to speak but then closed it again, seemingly at a loss for words. Aaron stood, his movements deliberate. "I don't know who you are anymore," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "But I know you're not the woman I married." He walked out, leaving Gwen standing there, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy in the air. Outside, the cool night breeze did little to soothe the storm raging inside him. Aaron wandered aimlessly along the beach, the waves lapping at his feet as he tried to make sense of what had happened. The video on his phone was undeniable proof of Gwen's betrayal, but it was also a reminder of the life he thought he had, the future he had envisioned with the woman he loved. And now, all of it lay in ruins, scattered like the grains of sand beneath his feet. Aaron barely slept that night. The betrayal replayed in his mind on an endless loop, each detail more painful than the last. By dawn, his decision was made. There was no salvaging this. He would leave Gwen behind, not just at the resort, but in his life. As the first rays of sunlight crept into their suite, Aaron moved quietly, gathering his belongings. Gwen was still asleep, her face serene, a cruel contrast to the storm brewing inside him. Every item he packed felt like another nail in the coffin of their marriage. The love he'd once felt for her was now buried beneath layers of anger, humiliation, and heartbreak. Before leaving, Aaron sat down at the small desk in the corner of the room, pulling out his laptop. The first order of business was their finances. He logged into their joint bank account, staring for a moment at the balance they had built together over the years. His jaw clenched as he thought about how Gwen had likely spent some of that money on her clandestine rendezvous. Without hesitation, he transferred all but a modest amount into his personal account, ensuring Gwen would have enough for food and necessities but nothing more. Next, he called their bank to place a freeze on the joint account. The representative's cheerful voice felt almost mocking as Aaron explained the situation in clipped tones. "Yes, it's urgent," he said firmly. "I need the account frozen immediately." Once that was done, he opened their airline's website. Gwen's return ticket stared back at him, a glaring reminder of the life they had planned to resume once their honeymoon ended. With a few swift clicks, he canceled her flight. She would have to find her own way home, if she even cared to return at all. Finally, Aaron sent an email to their home security company, instructing them to reprogram the locks. "Effective immediately," he wrote, his fingers pounding the keyboard with a mixture of determination and fury. The thought of Gwen walking back into their home, as if nothing had happened, was unbearable. Satisfied that he had taken every step necessary to sever ties, Aaron stood and looked around the suite one last time. The memories of their first days here, the laughter, the shared dreams, felt like a cruel joke now. He grabbed his bag and left, closing the doors softly behind him. The resort was quiet in the early morning hours, the air still heavy with the scent of salt and plumeria. Aaron walked briskly to the front desk, his footsteps echoing on the stone path. The concierge greeted him with a polite smile. "Good morning, Mr. Collins. Checking out early?" Aaron nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes. I need a car to the airport as soon as possible." The concierge's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Of course. Let me arrange that for you." As Aaron waited, he caught a glimpse of the bar where Gwen had spent so many nights with Jacob. A fresh wave of anger surged through him, but he pushed it down, focusing instead on the future he was now determined to rebuild alone. The car arrived, and Aaron climbed in without a backward glance. The driver tried to make small talk, but Aaron's curt responses quickly silenced him. The drive to the airport was filled with tense silence, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of palm trees swaying in the breeze. At the airport, Aaron navigated through security and boarding like a man on autopilot. Each step felt surreal, as if he were watching someone else's life unfold. When the plane finally took off, leaving the paradise that had turned into a nightmare far behind, Aaron allowed himself to exhale. But the sense of relief was fleeting. As the plane ascended, the reality of what had happened sank in. He replayed the moment he had seen Gwen and Jacob together, the kiss that shattered everything. The humiliation of it burned fresh, his anger reigniting with every thought. Arriving back home, Aaron's first stop was a hardware store, where he purchased new locks as a precaution in case Gwen managed to circumvent the security company's update. By the time he reached their house, a place that once felt like a sanctuary, he was a man on a mission. He changed the locks himself, his hands steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. Every turn of the screwdriver felt like reclaiming control over a life that had spiraled out of his grasp. Once the new locks were secure, Aaron stepped back, staring at the front door. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. The wedding photos still adorned the walls, their smiling faces now mocking him. He pulled them down, one by one, and placed them in a box. Each frame felt heavier than the last, the memories inside them tainted beyond repair. Finally, Aaron sat down at the dining table, his laptop in front of him. He typed out a message to Gwen, keeping it brief and to the point. "I know what you did. Don't come back. The locks are changed, and your access to our accounts is blocked. If you need anything, ask Jacob. I'm done." He hit send, feeling a grim satisfaction as the email disappeared into cyberspace. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Aaron poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring out the window at the quiet street below. He thought about the life he and Gwen had planned, the dreams they had shared. It was gone now, irreparably shattered by her betrayal. And yet, as the hours ticked by, Aaron felt something unexpected, a flicker of relief. The marriage that had weighed him down for far too long was over. He didn't have to fight for someone who had so clearly chosen someone else. That night, for the first time in weeks, Aaron slept soundly.